Daniel wasn't a man of many words. He spoke through music. Whether it was a rainy morning or a golden afternoon, he could always be found sitting at the old piano inside the community center. His fingers danced over the keys like they were, telling secrets he couldn't say out loud. Most people didn't even notice him, but Eliza did. She was new in town, a music teacher who had just taken a job at the local elementary school. On her second day, she heard someone playing Beethoven. In the main hall, the notes were soft but powerful, floating through the air like a quiet invitation. Curious, she followed the sound, and that's when she saw him. Daniel looked focused, almost lost in his own world. His eyes were closed, his body swayed gently with the rhythm, and for a moment, Eliza just stood there listening. When he finally stopped, she clapped softly. He turned, a little surprised. "You teach music too?" she asked with a warm smile. Daniel nodded. Just ... play it, don't talk about it much. That's how it started. It's not with a big romantic speech or some magical moment. Just two people who understood each other without needing to explain anything. After school hours, they began meeting at the piano room. Sometimes they played together. Sometimes one would listen while the other played. Slowly, music became there. Language Daniel had always kept to himself, but with Eliza, he felt safe. She brought light into places in his life he didn't even know were dark. She laughed easily, sometimes off-key, especially when she forgot notes during practice. He liked that. She didn't try to be perfect, just real. One evening, they stayed late at the center, playing duets until the janitor had to gently remind them it was closing time. As they walked out into the cool night air, Eliza said, "There's something about music. It makes everything else quieter." Daniel smiled. "It's the only way I ever knew how to speak." After that night, they were almost inseparable. They had different styles. Daniel preferred the classics, while Eliza enjoyed playful modern tunes. But when they played together, it worked. It just did. She'd add a cheerful twist to his serious melodies, and he'd ground her carefree. Rhythms with depth and heart. Their favorite song to play was Claire de Lune. Elisa used to say it felt like falling in love, underwater, soft, slow, and impossible to describe. People in town started to notice them. They were always together at community events, school recitals, and weekend jam sessions. It wasn't loud. Love. It was quiet and steady, like a melody that lingers long after the music ends. Daniel had never believed he'd find someone like her. He had been through his own share of silent heartbreaks, of people walking away without ever really seeing him. But Eliza saw him. Not just the musician. Not just the quiet guy. She saw him. One night he took her to a small cafe by the lake. Local band was playing. But Eliza couldn't stop looking at Daniel. She reached across the table, holding his hand. "I hope we never stop playing together," she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "We won't." That fall, Daniel started composing his first full piece for her. He didn't tell her at first. He'd play it when she wasn't around, perfecting each note until it felt just right. It wasn't fast or complicated. It was simple, honest. Every note held a piece of their story. When he finally played it for her on her birthday, she cried. "This is us," she whispered. He just nodded. That's all he ever needed to hear. They never talked about forever, but everyone around them could feel it. There was something rare between them, something pure. It wasn't made of big moments, but of small ones. Her hand on his shoulder when he played, his smile when she missed a note and laughed anyway. Their shared silence that said more than words ever could. At one of the school concerts, the kids surprised Eliza by performing the song Daniel had written for her. She stood frozen in the crowd, eyes wide, lips trembling. After the show, she ran up to him and hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. "I love you," she whispered into his ear. That was the first time she said it, and he said it back. That winter, they talked about moving in together. Nothing fancy, just a small place with space for 2 pianos. Maybe a cat, maybe a garden. They had plans. Simple ones. Happy ones. But life, as Daniel would learn, doesn't always play the songs we expect. The next part of their story would not be as gentle. But for now, in this part the music was sweet, the love was real, and the silence between notes was filled with hope. It was supposed to be a perfect evening. Daniel had spent the whole day setting things up at the community center. Candles, flowers, and a piano newly polished. He even brought in soft yellow lights to create the warm glow Eliza loved. That night he planned to play her song, the one he had written just for her hand, ask her to move in with him. She had no idea. He wanted it to be a surprise. Eliza had told him she'd be a little late. Parent-teacher meeting ran long, she said, but she promised she'd be there by 6:30. He smiled, told her to drive safe. Then he sat down at the piano and waited. The clock struck 6:30, then 6:40, then 7 o'clock. Still, no Eliza. He thought maybe she got stuck in traffic. Maybe she forgot her phone again. It had happened before. But when the door finally opened, it wasn't Eliza. It was a police officer. Daniel stood up, confused. The officer looked hesitant, eyes full of the kind of pain people only wear when they have to say something no one wants to hear. "There's been an accident," the officer said quietly. The words didn't sink in, not at first. Then came the details. A 2-car crash, just outside of town. Rain-slicked road. One vehicle flipped into a ditch. The driver died on impact. The ID on the scene said Eliza's name. Daniel couldn't breathe. He couldn't speak. The world around him stopped. He walked out without saying anything. Past the candles. Past the piano. Cut into the cold air where her laughter should have been. He kept walking. His legs moved, but his heart stayed frozen. That night, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the wall until morning. The sun came up, but the light felt wrong, too bright for a world without her. At the funeral, people cried, spoke kind words, shared memories. Daniel didn't say a word. When it was his turn to approach her grave, he didn't bring flowers. He brought his keyboard, he set it down on the grass, sat on the bench, played Claire de Lune their song. Each note cracked open a piece of him. His fingers shook, but he played through the tears. That was the last thing he could do for her, give her music one more time. Some said it was the most beautiful goodbye they'd ever seen. But for Daniel, it wasn't a goodbye. It was the start of something else, something no one else could understand. In the days that followed, he didn't answer calls, didn't check messages. He stopped going to the community center. The piano gathered dust. He didn't eat much. Didn't sleep much either, but on the 7th day after the funeral, he did something no one expected. He packed up his keyboard and went back to her grave, and he played one song, then another. A quiet woman nearby watched him and softly asked, "Do you do this for her?" He nodded once. She loved to listen. From that day forward, Daniel returned every week. Rain, snow, heat. He played for Eliza like she was still there, just beneath the grass, hearing every note. Some said he was lost in grief. Others called it healing. But to Daniel it was neither two. Him, it was love. Years passed, and people began to notice the man with the piano at the cemetery. Locals would pause and listen. Some would leave flowers beside her grave. Even children would stop their games just to hear him play. Cemetery, usually a place of silence, became a quiet concert hall once a week. But Daniel never looked up. Never played for the people. Only for her. On the 5th anniversary of her passing, a small local paper ran a story, "The Man Who Plays for Love, a pianist's tribute that never fades." It caught attention. TV crews called. Reporters reached out. Strangers sent letters. Daniel declined every interview. This wasn't a show. It wasn't a performance. It was a promise. One he made the night she left, and one he kept with every note. By the 10th year, the flowers around Eliza's grave had doubled. Strangers left small notes. "We heard your music. Your love lives. On she must be proud." Daniel still said little, but the pain, though softer now, stayed. There were days he almost stopped playing, days when the keys felt heavy, when his fingers stiffened from age and cold. But something always pulled him back, a feeling, memory. A voice in the wind that sounded like hers, whispering, "Keep playing, Danny. I'm here." It began quietly. No announcement, no plan, no schedule. Just Daniel carrying his worn-out bench and keyboard to her grave, week after week. The grass always felt damp in the early morning. The wind tugged at his coat, but Daniel didn't care. This was his time with Eliza. Their world. Their space. While others moved on, built new lives, forgot names on headstones. Daniel remembered. The first few times, no one noticed. The cemetery was usually empty at that hour. But one Saturday morning, an elderly woman walking her dog stopped near the gate. She stood quietly, listening as Daniel played their song. The next week, she came back with a thermos of tea. She didn't say much, just placed it by the bench with a small note. That read, "Thank you. That music brought back someone I loved." Daniel didn't know her name. He never asked. But after that day, others followed at first. It was just a few people, curious neighbors, early joggers, a gardener who trimmed hedges slower than usual, so he could stay within earshot. Then someone shared a photo online. A man playing piano for a woman who could no longer hear him, yet somehow it got shared and reshared, not viral, not loud, just quietly touching people. A nurse commented, "This gave me strength today." A man going through divorce wrote, "This reminded me what love is." A teenager said, "I want to love like this someday." Daniel didn't know any of it. He didn't care about likes, views, or comments. He only knew one thing. Every Saturday morning, he had to be there. For her, each time he played, the songs changed. Sometimes soft jazz, sometimes classical, sometimes pieces he had written for Eliza but never played aloud before. He imagined her listening, eyes closed, hands folded in her lap, like she used to do during their late-night practices. He talked to her between songs, not with words, with melodies, soon. A florist from town began leaving white roses near the bench. Every weekend, no note, no signature, just a single rose. Always fresh, Daniel noticed. But he never asked. Love, he believed, didn't need explaining. By the second year, something strange had happened. The gravesite had become a place of stillness, not just for him, but for everyone. People brought lawn chairs. A local artist sketched quietly in the background. A grieving mother once came with her son and whispered, "Let's just listen for a while. It helps." Daniel never turned to look. He never asked why they came. To him, it was always about Eliza, but the music was doing something. Something. Bigger than grief, it was healing. Then, one winter morning, it snowed. He almost stayed home. His hands were stiff. The wind bit hard. The path was icy, but he went anyway. When he reached the grave, the bench was already cleared. Someone had shoveled the snow away and left a scarf draped over the keyboard bag. Tucked into it was a note. "She would have wanted you warm today." Daniel's chest tightened. He sat down, pulled the scarf around his neck, and played slowly. The cold didn't matter. His heart was warm. A year later, on what would have been Elisa's 40th birthday, a small crowd gathered near the hill where her grave rested. They didn't speak. They brought candles, photos of their own loved ones, poems, folded paper cranes. No one organized it. No one advertised it. It just happened. And when Daniel arrived, he saw the candles flickering, faces waiting. But still, he didn't say anything. Simply sat down and played. First Claire de Lune, then his own composition, then a song Eliza used to hum when she cooked. Tears ran down faces he'd never seen before. But Daniel kept his eyes on the piano. Always, sometime later. The town installed a bench nearby, engraved with, "For those who listen with the heart." They didn't tell him. He found it one day by accident and just stood there. Reading the words over and over, he sat on the bench, closed his eyes, and whispered. She would have smiled at that. By the 5th year, local school kids called him the Piano Man. Some drew pictures of a man and a woman with musical notes in the sky. A boy once asked his dad at the cemetery, "Is he playing so she won't feel lonely?" The father smiled gently. "Maybe she's the one helping." him feel less lonely. The ritual, once a private sorrow, had become something else, a rhythm, a heartbeat, a story that lived in the music. And Daniel, though still grieving, found comfort in the silence between songs, because in that silence, he could almost hear her whisper, "I'm still listening." By the time 7 years had passed, Daniel had become more than a grieving man with a piano. He had become a story, not the kind printed in books, not the kind told with excitement, but the kind that made people pause, listen, feel at the edge of town. Near the old oak-lined cemetery, parents began telling their children, "That's where the man plays music for the woman he lost." The children would ask, "Does she hear him?" And the parents would always answer the same way. Maybe not with ears, but with love? Probably. Every Saturday, just after sunrise, Daniel made his way down the quiet path. Keyboard case in one hand, fold-up bench in the other. Same coat, same scarf, same steady walk. Locals grew to know the routine. Some would time their morning jogs around his visit just to catch a few minutes of his music drifting through the air. Even those who never spoke to Daniel treated him with quiet respect. At the cafe, a hot drink would be waiting for him, afterward paid for by someone anonymous. A barista once left a sticky note on his cup, "For the song that reminded me to call my dad today. Thank you." He never asked who left the messages. He simply took his drink, nodded in thanks, and walked home. The town didn't plan to make him a legend, but sometimes legends write themselves. One spring, a journalist traveling through the region heard the story from a cab driver. "There's this guy," he said, "plays piano for his girl. Been doing it for years. Doesn't talk much. Just plays." The journalist visited the cemetery the following weekend, expecting something sentimental maybe, even exaggerated. What he saw instead made him forget to take notes. Daniel sat beside the grave, eyes closed, his hands floating over the keys with the soft touch of someone speaking to a ghost. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. More real than anything the journalist had covered in years. The article came out 2 weeks later. The man who never let go, a pianist's silent love song to the past. It spread fast. Suddenly, Daniel's quiet ritual wasn't just a local tale, it was national. Then global. People from other towns, states even, other countries, sent letters to the community center asking about him. Some mailed him scarves, hand warmers, thank you notes written in different languages. One woman in France wrote, "I lost my husband 5 years ago, but now I go to his grave and sing to him. You helped me remember love doesn't end." The attention didn't change Daniel. He still arrived the same way, still wore the same. Coates still played the same songs, but he noticed something. Now, the cemetery had visitors who didn't know Eliza, didn't know him, but they came not out of curiosity, but out of something. Deeper grief, hope, longing, healing. People would sit near her grave not to hear him, but to feel what he felt, to remember their own Eliza. One rainy morning, Daniel arrived to find a small group standing silently under umbrellas. They didn't move, didn't speak. He sat up as usual, gave a small nod, and began to play. A few minutes in, a young woman stepped closer. Holding an old photograph of her father, she placed it beside Eliza's gravestone and cried. Daniel didn't stop playing. The music did what words could in single quotes. It held her, later that year. The town put up a simple wooden sign near the cemetery gate, the music corner in honor of love that endures. No mention of names, no. Spotlight, just a quiet tribute. Daniel saw it on a quiet afternoon. He ran his fingers across the carved letters and smiled. Still, despite everything, the stories, the recognition, the letters, Daniel never thought of himself as special. Why? Do you keep coming back? A teenager once asked him after watching from a distance. Daniel didn't give a long speech. He simply said, "Because she mattered." Once during winter, the keyboard wouldn't start. Batteries froze. The keys stiffened. He sat in silence. Unsure what to do then, without saying anything, An older man stepped forward and handed him his own small, portable keyboard. "Play for her," he said. "We'll listen to." Daniel looked up, really looked at the man, then nodded, and played. What began as one man's quiet bye had become something bigger. Not a performance, not a show, but a living memory that others could walk into and feel. For themselves, a reminder that grief, when carried with love, can become music the world never forgets. It was the 20th year, 20 winters, 20 summers, 20 birthdays, 20 anniversaries. And Daniel had never missed a single visit. His beard had turned more gray than black. His steps were slower, but still steady. The keyboard case had been replaced twice, and the bench had one leg that squeaked when he sat down, but none of that mattered. The ritual remained unchanged. That morning, the sky was heavy with clouds. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind, rustling through the trees, and set up his small bench near Eliza's grave. He unpacked the keyboard slowly, each motion done with care, almost reverence. But as he reached for the folded cloth he used to clean the keys, he froze. Something was there. Not flowers, not a scarf, not one of the usual quiet gifts left by strangers. It was an envelope, old-fashioned, pale cream, his name, written in soft blue ink. Daniel, just that. His heart gave a strange jolt. No one called him by name here. No one left anything with a name. The notes were always addressed to Piano Man or to the one who remembers. Hands trembling slightly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The handwriting looked familiar. Faint curves, a little loop at the end of the lowercase y. It read, "The music kept me alive. I'm back in town, please. Meet me where we first played." No name, no explanation. Daniel read it again, and again, then sat very still. At first he thought it must be a mistake, someone trying to be poetic, or cruel, kind in a strange, confusing way. But that handwriting, it pulled at something buried in him, something deep, untouched for decades. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it in his chest like a chord he hadn't played in years. That night, he didn't sleep. He placed the letter on the table and stared at it for hours as if waiting for it to speak again. Who would write something like that? And why now? And why there? The next day, Daniel walked to the place mentioned in the note, the old community center. It had changed over the years. The entrance was repainted, the flower beds now filled with tall grasses instead of roses. But the main hall, the one with the upright piano in the corner, still stood. He stepped inside. Dust hung in the air like old memories. The piano was still there, covered with a faded cloth, and someone was sitting beside it. Daniel stopped at the doorway. The figure was turned, away, head bowed long. Silver-streaked hair fell across the shoulder of a worn green coat. His breath caught in his throat. Then the figure turned, and time collapsed. It was her, Eliza, older, softer, a little thinner than he remembered, few lines on her face, a new heaviness in her eyes. But it was her. She stood up slowly. "I didn't know if you'd come," she said quietly. Daniel couldn't speak. She stepped forward, hands shaking. "I know this makes no sense, but I'm here. I'm alive." Reached out, touched her hand, real, warm, alive. "Eliza," he whispered. She nodded, tears falling. "It's me." The story that followed was almost too strange to believe. She hadn't died. Not completely. After the accident, she had been rushed to a rural hospital under a different name. No ID, no family contact, comatose. For months, then years. Some clerical error led the authorities to believe she had died. Her car was totaled. Her bag thrown far from the crash site was never found until weeks later. By then, the funeral had already taken place. By the time she awoke nearly 2 years later, her memory was shattered. No name, no past, just sounds, music. A single melody repeating in her head, Claire Denis. It became her anchor. Doctors said her recovery was slow, piece by piece. She was placed in a long-term care facility, then moved again. She remembered nothing until 2 years ago. When she heard someone playing the song at a park concert near a small clinic, the music unlocked. Something, a memory, a name. Daniel, she tried to find him, but the world had moved on. She didn't know where to look. Daniel Quiet, Private Daniel, was not easy to track down. It took time. Old records. A few helpful people. Then last week she saw the article online, "The Man Who Plays for Love." She knew. Daniel sat beside her, still in disbelief. He had played for her for 20 years. And somehow, the music had brought her back. Not just to him, but to herself. For days after she returned, Daniel kept asking himself one question. How do you hold someone who disappeared from your life and somehow found their way back? He didn't have an answer, neither did Eliza. The truth was, they were both strangers now, holding memories like puzzle pieces from different lifetimes. They sat in the cafe near the lake, the same one where she once held his hand across the table and said she never wanted them to stop playing music together. Now, her fingers trembled slightly as she wrapped them around a cup of tea. Daniel watched her in silence. The woman in front of him had Eliza's eyes. Her voice, even her laugh, but she also carried 20 years of silence, could never fully understand. And he carried 20 years of music written for someone he thought was gone forever. Do you still play? She asked quietly. Daniel smiled. Only every Saturday at your grave. Eliza's eyes glistened. I saw the bench, and the white roses, and the notes. I didn't think anyone would do that for me. You mattered, he replied, the same way he had once told a curious boy in the cemetery. She looked away for a moment. I feel like I was asleep for a lifetime. Daniel leaned forward. And I feel like I was wide awake in a dream that never ended. They didn't rush it. There were no fireworks. No dramatic kiss in the rain. Just long walks, quiet meals, shared stories. Daniel took her to the community garden where they used to play. 4 kids on weekends. She didn't remember all of it, but she remembered enough. The smell of this place, she said one morning, eyes closed. It's like home. Sometimes she'd ask to hear one of the songs he wrote for her. He would play them, one by one. She'd close her eyes, listen, and cry, not out of pain, but because somehow she knew those songs had kept her alive. Once, I asked him, why did you keep playing for so long? He thought for a while before answering, because every time I played, I could pretend you were still here. I could feel you close, like you hadn't left, like I hadn't lost you. She reached across the table and touched his hand. You didn't lose me, I just got delayed. The reunion wasn't always easy. Eliza had to relearn things, how to live in a faster, louder world, how to use a phone. Sometimes she'd forget words or get overwhelmed in crowds. Daniel never judged her. He just stayed near. A quiet presence, steady as ever. One afternoon she looked up from the piano they now shared and asked, do you think we can still make music together? Daniel didn't answer. He simply placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. She joined in after a few notes, hesitant at first, but slowly warming up. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful, just like before. Word began to spread that Eliza had returned. At first, people didn't believe it. The woman he played for, she's back. No way. But then someone saw them walking together at the Sunday market. Then another saw them playing a short duet at the library piano. A local paper ran a short headline, she came back. The song continues. And people began to whisper again, not out of sadness this time, but awe. Daniel and Eliza decided to visit the cemetery together. It felt strange. She stood at her own gravestone, quietly reading the inscription that had been carved without her knowing. Eliza. Loved beyond words, missed beyond measure. Still heard in every note. She laughed softly. It's a lovely stone. Daniel chuckled. I picked it. She knelt down and touched the flowers left behind. These people, they never knew me, but they cared. Daniel nodded. Because your story helped them heal. She turned to him. And what about you? He met her eyes. I'm just learning how to heal now. That evening they played together for the first time in front of others. It's an impromptu performance at the town's evening fair. People gasped. Whispers turned to smiles. Phones stayed in pockets. No one wanted to break the moment they played Clair de Lune. But this time, they added something new. A variation in the middle, a soft, rising bridge Eliza hummed to herself during her recovery. Daniel wove it in like thread through silk. When they finished, no one clapped. They just sat still, soaking in the moment. Because some reunions don't need applause, they need silence to let the miracle breathe. The hardest part about reunions isn't the moment they happen. It's what comes after. After the headlines fade, after the town stops whispering, after the shock becomes reality, that's when life begins. Again quietly, awkwardly, and sometimes painfully. Daniel and Eliza knew that. They felt it every morning they woke up under the same roof, unsure of what came next. The house Daniel lived in wasn't big. Just a small, two-bedroom place with creaky floors and too many books stacked in corners. It wasn't designed for starting over. It was built for waiting for someone who was never supposed to come back. Now she had, and her suitcase stood in the hallway like a question neither of them had answered yet. The first few weeks were filled with small things, learning how to live together again. She made tea, but forgot where he kept the cups. He tried to show her how to use the microwave, but she laughed and said, I still prefer things cooked slow. She liked sunlight in the kitchen. He liked quiet when he composed. She played messy chords, played with structure. But somehow, it worked, just like before. Only slower now. More careful, like two musicians relearning a song they hadn't played in decades. One rainy afternoon, Daniel sat at the piano. Lost in thought, Eliza came and leaned against the doorframe. You haven't written anything in weeks. He looked up. I'm afraid too. She raised an eyebrow. Afraid of what? That I'll write like I used to. For the version of you I kept alive in my head. Not the real you. Not now. Walked over, sat beside him, placed her hand on the keys and whispered, Then let's write it together. And so they began. Not with grand ideas, but with a single note, then another, then a line of lyrics. She scribbled on the back of a grocery list. It wasn't meant to be a masterpiece. It was meant to be them, each evening. After dinner, they sat at the old upright piano in the corner of the living room. They played. She would hum. He would follow. Sometimes she'd stop and laugh mid-verse because she forgot the next word. Sometimes he'd tear up. She would quietly place her hand on his back and just let the silence fill the room. Their new song didn't sound like the ones they used to play. It was softer, wiser, a little. Broken but honest. It had edges, but it also had hope. Neighbors sometimes paused outside their window, hearing music drift through the air. It wasn't perfect. It didn't have to be. It was real. One day, Lisa asked, Do you ever feel angry that I was gone so long? Daniel thought for a while before answering. Not angry, he said. Just sad for all the time we missed. She nodded. Me too. But I think we're making up for it, note by note. As the weeks passed, they added more to their song. He gave it a name, after the silence. It became more than a melody. It became their bridge between the past and the present, between the grave and the piano, between the life that was and the life that still could be. Eliza found old pictures and boxes, photos of them at concerts, holding hands at lakeside picnics, laughing on park benches. She pinned them on a corkboard above the piano. Memories that came back, she said, and some that never left. Daniel added a new photo, the two of them sitting on the cemetery bench. I want this one here too, he said, to remind us of how far we've come. They began recording their song, just the two of them. No studio, no producer, just a phone, a microphone, a piano, and two voices healing together. One night, Eliza whispered, What if no one listens to it? Because we did. But someone did listen. He uploaded the piece quietly, no announcement. No title splash. Just a small note. A song written after she came back. Within days, comments flooded in. I cried. This sounds like waking up from a long dream. I played this for my mom who has memory loss. She smiled. People didn't know the full story, but they felt it. They felt them. Daniel looked at Eliza one morning as sunlight spilled onto the piano keys. You know, he said, 420. Years, I played for a ghost. She looked at him, eyes soft. And now? He reached for her hand. Now I play with someone who came back stronger than any ghost ever could. She smiled, then leaned over and kissed him, gently. And for the first time in years, the music in their house didn't echo with sadness. It echoed with something new, something whole. No one expected a concert. Not from Daniel, not from Eliza, not after everything they'd been through. But one spring morning, Eliza walked into the community center, the same one where she and Daniel first met, and noticed something that made her stop the piano. The old one in the corner, still there. Still waiting, she ran her hand along its wooden edge and smiled to herself. A few minutes later, she called Daniel and said, I think we should play again, but this time, for them. At first, Daniel hesitated. He never cared for crowds. Music had always been private, a quiet language, shared with her and her alone. But Eliza placed a hand on his chest and said gently, You shared your grief with the world. Let's share the joy too. He couldn't argue with that. They didn't announce it in newspapers, no social media blasts, no flyers on lampposts. Just a simple handwritten sign posted outside the community center 1 week before. An evening of music and memory, one night only. Performed by Daniel and Eliza. The night of the concert, folding chairs filled up faster than anyone expected. Locals, strangers, a few who had visited. Eliza's grave over the years without ever knowing the full truth. Even the florist who had once left white roses every Saturday sat quietly in the back, holding a tissue in one hand. No one said much. They didn't need to. The room was full of people who had carried their own losses, and now came to witness something rare, love that had survived the impossible. When Daniel and Eliza stepped onto the small stage, there was no applause, just stillness. Eliza wore a soft blue dress, the color of the sky right before dawn. Daniel wore the same scarf someone had once left for him. During a snowy winter by the grave, he sat at the piano. She stood beside him, and together they began to play. It wasn't Claire DeLelle. Not this time. They played after the silence, the song. They had written together. One built slowly over long nights and tear and laughter and tears. The one that had no fancy chords, no complicated rhythm, just truth. Honest, fragile, strong. Every note told a story of goodbye, of waiting, of coming back, of rebuilding, of loving again. About halfway through the song, something remarkable happened. Eliza began to sing. Her voice wasn't perfect. It trembled on the high notes, softened in the middle, caught on one word that made her voice crack. But no one in that room cared, because when she sang, it felt like time itself was pausing just for a little while to listen. Daniel didn't look at the audience once. His eyes stayed on her, smiling gently with every note she carried. He didn't need to see the tears. He could feel them. In the silence, when they reached the final line, Eliza's voice broke into a whisper. You played for me when the world went quiet. Now, I sing for you as it comes alive again. And then, silence. No one clapped. Not right away. They just sat there, breathing in the moment, letting it settle in their hearts. Then slowly, someone stood up. Then another, and another. And the entire room rose to their feet, not in noise, but in honor. Not for a performance, but for a promise kept. After the concert, people waited quietly to speak with them. Some just offered hugs. Others handed small note scraps of paper with words like thank you, you gave me hope, or I lost someone too. Daniel and Eliza stayed until the last person left, then walked home hand in hand, under a night sky full of stars. Later that week, the community center replaced the old piano with a newer one, stronger, richer in sound, but they saved the original bench and placed a plaque beneath it that read, In honor of the song that never ended, Daniel and Eliza, a love that played on. Back at home, the sun began rising through the windows. Daniel poured 2 cups of tea. Eliza opened the curtains and let the light pour across the piano keys. He sat. She stood beside him, and they began writing their next song. Not because they had something to prove, not because the world asked for it, but because that's what they had always done. From the very beginning, they played together. The end.